What's the creepiest thing that's happened to you personally that made you question reality? Story 1. When I was younger, around 11 or so, I would sleep in my sister's bed when she wasn't home, since she had a nice heated waterbed. One night she wasn't home, so I went in, shut the door, and went to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night out in the living room on the couch. I was super confused. So I went to see if my sister came home and kicked me out. Door was still closed, the bedsheet was barely moved, and my sister wasn't home. That morning, I asked my parents if they moved me, but they said they didn't wake up all night. My sister came home and she said she had no idea what I was talking about. I had no reason to think she was lying, since it would be dumb to put me there in the middle of the night and leave again. I have never had a sleepwalking incident, as I can't even roll over without waking up. Everyone thought I was lying. Years later, she has moved out and it's my room now. I had a radio I used for classical music when I slept. One night I was playing that Kingdom of Camelot FB game. It's kind of late, like 11 or so, and my parents are asleep. Suddenly, I hear this super loud sound in the middle of the room. It sounds like a circular saw, but at a low pitch. I'm starting to freak out as the pitch gets higher and higher until it plateaus. Suddenly, it cuts off and the radio in my room turns on. I was so scared I just looked at my door for a few minutes, trying to decide what to do. I eventually went in and shut it off, but didn't sleep that night. I asked my parents about it, and they never heard anything. Again, I slept all night. I never slept well in that room again for the remaining years I was there. I still feel weird about it after 15 years. Story 2. Got a phone call from a private number. I missed the call and got a voicemail. It was my brother, who was in prison at the time and calling from the prison phone, and my mom having a part of a conversation. So I texted my mom and said, "Sorry I missed the phone call, but hoped her and brother were well." She had no clue what I was talking about. She hadn't spoken to my brother at all that day. To this day, I have no idea why a private number called me and left an old recording of my brother and mother speaking. I get really weirded out thinking about who would have been on the other end if I answered. I still have the voicemail. It was really bizarre, and I genuinely have no explanation for it. Story 3. I was at the hospital getting a dose of intravenous iron, which takes about an hour. I laid back in the chair with my eyes closed and dozed off for a while. I woke up but remained completely still, my eyes still closed. I felt that someone was looking at me and popped my eyes open. Standing directly beside me was some guy, 30-ish maybe, shaggy brown hair, brown plaid shirt, untucked brown corduroy-looking pants. He seemed very surprised to see that I'd noticed him, and he instantly disappeared with a slight popping sound. This literally happened less than a week ago, and I'm still trying to make sense of it. I'm leaning towards an extremely vivid dream, but I don't know. I just don't know what else it could be. It was nobody that I knew or had ever seen before. Story 4. Heard my mother yell for me from the kitchen of my house one morning. My mom wasn't at my house. It was 5 a.m. She was asleep at her own place. I looked up from my PC game. My dog was chilling in the entrance to my bedroom. His hackles were raised and he was growling towards the kitchen. There was nothing there when checked, but what the heck? I'm not a believer in paranormal or religious demon or ghost crap, but I have no idea what this was, and I don't think I imagined my name being called. I heard it clear as anything in my mom's voice. My dog was instantly tuned as soon as it happened. Nothing delayed on his part. Maybe it could have been cross-universe interference leaking over. Story 5. This happened a few years back. I was visiting my ex at his parents' farmhouse. He was throwing a little party and everyone was drinking, including myself. One of the girls there wanted to go for a ride on the quad bike, and I said, "I'll jump on behind her." Obviously, me thinking she was sober, but stupid enough of me not to ask. Anyways, she starts it, and we're going for a nice drive at a pretty fast speed. Until I noticed that she was heading right towards an old dried up farm dam that was deep and full of rocks. I started yelling at her to steer the other way, but she wouldn't listen to me until last minute. She yanked the wheel heading towards a barbed wire fence. At that moment, a man's voice came into my mind to tell me to jump off the bike on my left-hand side, whereas I'm right-handed. But I listened and jumped off to my left. Everything went black for a second, and then I opened my eyes. The first thing I had noticed was that I was sitting cross-legged on the floor next to the fence that had been run flat over. I looked behind me and saw the girl having a seizure. She had stayed on the bike, crashed through the fence, and hit a very mature gum tree. The bike was toppled over to its right side. The girl had broken her neck and had internal bleeding. All I needed was one stitch from the barbed wire fence that stabbed me in the foot. My dad always said that my past grandpa is always looking out for us. And I guess it's true. Story 6. I don't know if this counts, but my grandfather recently passed, and the night I was taking care of him, At around 2 a.m., I was hearing or thinking, it's hard to describe. Numbers in my head, 529, 529. It kept repeating for a few minutes. I was so sleep deprived I didn't think much of it, other than just lack of sleep. Around 5 a.m., he asked me to get my grandmother. She was sleeping, we were on shifts, and I started to go get ready for bed. After I finish up, I go grab water from the kitchen, and my grandma comes in and tells me it happened. I look at the time she texted the nurse, who was meant to come check on him later in the day, 529. After everything settled, I remembered what I was thinking earlier that night, and it still freaks me out. Story 7, Italy, 2010. A murder case of a young girl who was about my age blew up on the news, and it was basically what everyone talked about. I had just read the book, The Lovely Bones, so I was convinced I could somehow talk to this girl. I started looking into ways of contacting ghosts. Some weird things happened, but they never really seemed that weird. They might as well have happened regardless. One night I stayed up late to watch a midnight special on the murder case, where they had played some home videos of this girl, where she stated that her favorite song was an Avril Lavigne one. I will not name the song. And for the next week, I had the song on repeat. About a week later, one evening, I met with my best friend in town. We were sitting by a water fountain, and I was playing music on my phone. Then that song comes on, and pretty much at the same time, a mother with her little girl also walks up to the water fountain and sits there. Little girl is staring at me. I think nothing of it. My friend then starts having a casual conversation with the mother and asks her what the little girl's name was. It was the same name as the murdered girl, all while the murdered girl's song was playing. Now, the name is a popular one, but that was one hell of a coincidence that made me quit trying to contact ghosts, and I have never ever played that song again. Story 8. The building of my apartment is parallel to another building of the same type. The apartments can see the windows of the opposite apartments very easily. One evening, already dark, I look out my window and see some other windows with light. I see a person looking out of it, rather a shadow. When I close my left eye, it's gone. When I look with my right eye or both, it's there. Some further testing that evening, it appeared my eye just broke light in a weird way that day. Story 9. A few years back, I lived in a trailer in the woods next to a highway, and me and my family were in the middle of renovating it. We had just got done painting the walls. My and my brother had gotten the car, and my sister was standing next to the car. My mom was trying to lock the door and come on, when my sister let out a blood-boiling scream and pointed in the woods. A tall, bald black man had been standing in the woods watching us. He didn't move. He was standing still with his arms by his side. He didn't say anything or move. My mom began to bolt towards the car. Forgetting to close the door, she and my sister jumped in and we booked it the next day we came back. And he had went into the trailer. He has ate a lot of our food and trashed the place. We found blood on the floor, but it was terrifying. Story 10. First time I realized those random sounds I was hearing weren't normal things, auditory hallucinations. It was late in the night, Dad was out, so just me and Mom talking normally about random stuff in the corridor. Suddenly, I hear rustling and footsteps from the living room. It was completely dark, and instinctively turned my eyes towards the dark. Mom looks concerned at me and asks me what I was looking for. I answer I heard footsteps, and she freaks out. Don't joke like that. There's nothing. She's very afraid of paranormal stuff and ghosts, seeing how she's quite superstitious. I walked in there and checked for more real threats like muggers or thieves, but there really was nothing, even as I got closer to the sound. While the sound moved further away, out on the balcony, then out in the yard, and asked Mom if she really couldn't hear those footsteps and rustling, she freaked out even more and told me sternly to stop, so I did. Story 11. I've had lots of creepy things happen to me, but I don't think I've shared these two here. I worked at a vet clinic that was built in an old house, historic neighborhood. Couldn't tear it down or redo the outside. One night, I was getting everything ready to leave for the night. I was by a window and I saw a man walk by the window. My first thought was that someone was skulking around outside, all female staff, so the man definitely wasn't an employee. But then I realized I was on the second floor. There was no possible way for a man to walk past the windows the way I saw. Turns out my coworkers had seen similar things. At the same clinic, when you walked upstairs at night, it would sometimes sound like someone was running up the stairs after you. It was creepy. Another time, when I was a preteen and early teenager, I got off my bed to walk to the bathroom before stopping in front of my TV because something on the TV caught my eye. After a second or two of standing there, I felt a strong urge to move to the side, so I did. As soon as I moved, a doll fell off of my shelf, an antique doll my grandmother's grandmother made, and landed right where I had been standing. It was very odd. Story 12. My uncle used to come back to the town we lived in, lived 4 hours away, and would often bring his cat while he visited his parents, my grandparents. One day, my grandma walked outside and accidentally let the cat out. They searched, and for a few years, there was never a sign of him. My grandma always felt horrible for losing the cat. She passed away after an issue with some heart surgery, and the entire extended family flew out from across the country to be there for the funeral. The funeral was the next day, and that evening we had an open casket viewing. Everyone filed out of the funeral home from the viewing, and my uncle and grandpa were the first to arrive back home. Sitting on the front step was a black and white cat, waiting. After no sign of him for a few years, the night we said goodbye to my grandma, there he was, chilling on the front step and happy to see my uncle. In Canada, they used to tattoo a number in the ear as an ID, so it was absolutely the same cat. It must have been living with someone else for those few years, but no one had ever spotted it since. He was just there. Everyone thought it was my grandma fixing a mistake that she had made. Story 13. I used to be very skeptical about paranormal activity, but that completely changed after I met my high school best friend. Her house was definitely haunted. The first thing I began to notice was the bruising. Every time I stayed over, I would get random bruises, which I didn't think much of at first because I am a person that bruises quite easily. But then the X marks scratches started to appear when I'd stay over. That crap started to creep me out, but apparently not enough because I continued to have sleepovers at her place. Until one night it was just me and her because her parents went on vacation and let her stay home. It was getting late and I was always the last to fall asleep. Once I started to drift off, I was awoken by a loud, deep male grunt and footsteps coming from the hallway towards the room we were in. Once they got closer, it stopped. I couldn't move a muscle. And I definitely crap a brick that night. We were completely alone in that house. Thank God she moved not too long after that. Story 14. I was on a student exchange in Germany, on the other side of the world from my family. One night I was getting ready for bed when I very clearly heard my mother's voice calling my name. It was real enough for me to immediately stop what I was doing and look around for the source of the voice. But there was nothing that I could see. The radio and the TV that were in my room were off, and the voice had clearly come from inside the room, not outside. Since then, over 20 years ago, there have been a couple of times where I've been alone, and I've heard a voice like it was right next to me, with no obvious source. Story 15. Not super creepy, but weirdly, we heard a voice calling out a name during a band rehearsal. Our band had split up for a few years, then we got back together for a reunion gig. One of the singers had left to move to Australia, so we had a new guy in. We just finished one song and were about to start another when we heard the absent singer's voice quite clearly calling out the bassist's name. It was even his real name, just a stupid in-joke nickname. Everyone stopped in their tracks and looked around. It felt a bit odd. Just to add, no one was dead or dying, and none of us, apart from one girl, believed us ghosts or spirits or anything. I have read of a theory where sometimes the ferric metals in building materials can act as itapa and trigger recordings. Story 16, this didn't happen to me personally, but I remember being a kid around 7 or 8 on a family holiday down in Cornwall, UK. I vividly remember my dad getting us all up around 3 a.m. and making us pack up as fast as we possibly could and get out of there and head back home to West Yorkshire, which was a good 5 or 6 hours drive. During the day, we did the journey in 3.5 hours. When we all asked my dad why we had to leave so suddenly, he just kept saying, "Look, I just need to get home right now." I remember the look on his face. He was stricken with worry and panic. We made it home and we didn't get a chance to go to sleep with it being the sunrise. It turns out that around that time when we were all rushing around getting packed up, my grandmother, my dad's mom, had a massive heart attack and had passed away right around the time he got us all up in a blind panic. My dad was the youngest of 5 kids and was my grandmother's favorite. He just knew something horrible had happened and knew he had to back up north. I'll never forget that day. Story 17. There are stories of people, alone in the woods, hearing singing and following the songs to their demise. Many of those stories talk about fairies and the wee folk. I was solo backpacking or camping in the Uncompahgre wilderness in Colorado. It was night, the wind was blowing, some rain splattering down. I'm not at all spiritual. I do not believe in the mystical, but as I heard singing, the words were indistinct, but the sound was as if a choir was singing off in the distance, but still also not too far away. Strong and resonant with many layers of tone and inflection. I felt a need to get out of my sleeping bag, my tent, and find out who was singing. I fought it, remembering the stories. I didn't go, but I still remember it. Calling, story 18. Months ago, I found out my uncle was dying from thyroid cancer. He was in bad shape. Couldn't talk for too long. Couldn't swallow his food and had to stay in bed. I think he was in stage 4. Apparently, he was suffering from it for a while now. Yet my aunt didn't tell my family because she didn't want my family dragged into it. A few days have passed, and I came across one of those biblically accurate angels videos. It was one that I have seen several times now. However, this one was different. I felt warmth and comfort as I watched it. And when I turned the screen off, I felt wings embracing me from behind. I soon fell asleep afterwards. When I woke up, I had missed calls from my dad. Apparently, my uncle had passed away a few hours earlier. Story 19. There was this house next to where I lived that supposedly had neighbors living in it. But the thing is, I have never seen a car parked in the driveway, and I've never seen anyone come in and out of this house. Mind you, I've lived in this house for about 4 years, and no activity from that house my entire time living there. There have been a couple of times I rode my bike in the backyard of that house with a friend. We assumed that no one lived there, even though we were told people do. You can see the bathroom from the backyard, and it was a pretty big window with now curtains. There were times where the light would be on and times where it wouldn't be on. On 2 separate occasions, I've seen a shadow silhouette, head peek out from the window really fast. And it kind of creeped me out, but I didn't pay too much attention to it. The light was off. The second time, I saw a silhouette of a hand dip in and out of the window really quick, just like the head. The light was on. I never went in that backyard again. I was so creeped out. Now I've always been skeptical of the paranormal, but I really can't explain these events. I would also often see shadowy figures dart across the windows of my own home, and I always thought it had something to do with that house. Story 20. It was around 5 a.m. when I woke up without any explanation. I got up, went to the kitchen, and drank some water. On my way back to my room, my dog suddenly started barking and looking directly at the mirror, waking up both of my parents. I didn't want to talk about it in the morning, and also looking at the mirror felt weirdly unpleasant. I invited 2 of my friends. We were watching a creepy video of a killer who blew up a girl alive. I didn't really think about it during the day, but at night I couldn't stop thinking about it. Then it hit me. I saw that man in my dream. That's why I woke up. It scared the crap out of me. I can't even explain it. Yesterday night, I slept with my dog in the bed, hugging it because I was super scared. And this happened 2 days ago. Fortunately, I didn't see him yesterday, but I'm still scared for tonight. I saw that man in my dreams before I even knew about his existence. And also, I think that my dog also saw him and started barking. I don't know what is going on. If I see him today, I'm going to literally start therapy. I know y'all might be thinking that it's because it affected me, but I saw him before I watched the video. I hope I never see him again. Story 21. So I had a dream where I was in an office building and there was an armed attacker. People were getting lived in every floor, and I made it to the top floor instead of the bottom floor. I saw so many people injured and gone. I arrived at the top floor and it was this big room. It was nice and quiet and organized here. People working on their desks like nothing was happening. The attacker, who I realize has a mask, comes up and has a shotgun. I knew I was dreaming at this point, so I tried to lucid dream and take control, and I couldn't. And the attacker shot me in the head, and I wasn't alive, but I could still see and move. Sleep paralysis, but in my dream. My vision was getting blurry, and I was getting tired. It becomes silent, and everyone in the room looks at me. No expression on their faces, and they all start crying with no emotion, and my vision is fully blurred out. The attacker leans down and takes off his mask and whispers down into my ear. He tells me in a concerned way, "You should have been awake by now." I get cold and I wake up. It's 4 a.m. and it's pretty dark in my room, obviously. I went to the bathroom and I tried to process what I just dreamt of. I say the words to myself, "You should be awake by now," in my head. And it not only made me really paranoid, but really sad. This still confuses me to this day.